Please, Excellency, you are here just on time. Sorry for the... Please. Thank you, and sorry.
Thank you.
So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us at the International Environment House, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of this video. We have the pleasure to welcome you today for a new session of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, which have kept the international community in Geneva and beyond engaged on this topic since the end of 2020, making links with various international processes. This third series of dialogues that kicked off 1 year ago is organized by the Geneva Environment Network in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, IUCN, Norway, Switzerland, the Forum on Trade, Environment, and the SDGs, known as TESS, and the University of Geneva. Let me remind everyone that we are reconvening today as the United Nations Environment Assembly made history in March last year by adopting a resolution setting up the path to a global treaty to end plastic pollution. The resolution requested the convening of an Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, with the ambition of completing its work by the end of 2024. The second session of this Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee is starting at the end of this month at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Various events are taking place to prepare for this negotiation. A new series of technical briefings organized by the INC Secretariat is kicking off tomorrow. The High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution has also been very active with various events. Other actors have also been active in proposing sessions, and our multi-stakeholder dialogue that you are now attending is completing this offer of events to brief and prepare stakeholders. After the formal welcome by the chair of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, His Excellency Ambassador Gustavo Mezzaquadra, we will start this event by giving the floor to the Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee and the host country on the preparations for the second session of the committee. We will then hear from various stakeholders their perspectives for this important negotiation, providing our audience with various views. Our guests will take stock of the options for Elements document and other documents recently released by the INC Secretariat and set the tone for what negotiations in Paris will address. Felix Wertli, head of the Global Affairs section of the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment and leading Switzerland delegation for this important negotiation, will moderate our session today. Switzerland is an important supporter of the Geneva Environment Network and of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues. And before you are formally welcome, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link is being shared in the chat for who is online with us, or is on the screen for who is in the room. Throughout the event, those of you who are online can raise their questions by using the Q&A box. We will have a dedicated session to answer these after the presentations if time allows. Finally, let me remind for those who are online that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen. Have a look at the current slide, which shows where to access automated transcript in 100 languages. Let's now formally welcome you. His Excellency Ambassador Gustavo Mezzaquadra has pre-recorded his message as due to a change in his schedule. He couldn't be live with us today. After His Excellency message, Felix Wertli will guide you through the event. Colleagues, let's hear His Excellency.
Dear Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, first of all, I would like to thank the Geneva Environment Network and the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues for the organization of this timely event aiming to provide updates on the preparation of INC-2 on plastic pollution and to address how stakeholders can engage in this process. Our gathering today represents an important opportunity to reflect on our progress since the adoption of UNEA 514 resolution, which seeks to tackle a challenge with growing consequences on human health and deep implications on the three interconnected major environmental challenges the world faces: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Allow me to remind you that our mandate is to reach, by the end of 2024, a legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. A timeline that recalls us the urgency of our response while the challenge continues to aggravate at a staggering pace. Half of our manufactured plastics having been made in the last 15 years, and production expected to double by 2050, while we only recycle 10% of it. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to act now and decisively. The INC-2 meeting will constitute an important stepping stone towards an agreement that should structurally address this challenge. Allow me please to share my broad visions on the latter. The agreement should be a multilateral instrument due to the transboundary nature of plastic and plastic pollution. It should cover the entire life cycle of plastic with a mix of core obligation and control measures, complemented by equally ambitious voluntary measures, means of implementation, and incentive mechanisms. Finally, it should be inclusive by design, considering the need for developing states whilst guaranteeing a just transition. Our negotiating process needs to bear in mind that while many plastics are beneficial in different sectors, not all of them have the same polymers, chemicals, additives, externalities, type of use, and end of life cycle. As such, they should not be addressed in the same manner in our instrument, which should be geared towards reducing the size of the problem by tackling problematic and unnecessary plastic, including single-use and short-lived ones, ensuring that the plastics that enter the market are not harmful, be it by their composition or potential leakage into the environment, including through microplastic releases, guaranteeing that they are recyclable, reusable, and repairable by design, within economic systems conceived to be circular. Waste should be our last option, and when it happens, it must be done in a safe and an environmentally sound manner. Finally, we need to address legacy plastic, including ghost fishing gear. In sum, we need a strong treaty on plastic pollution, with ambitious goals but equally ambitious means of implementation. This will ensure the effective protection and conservation of the environment and the guarantee of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The time for negotiations is short, but this should not lead us to settle for a weak agreement, not only because it is the right thing to do, but also because it is our biggest intergenerational responsibility. Over the past month, the Secretariat has been working in consultation with me on the potential options for Elements paper. I am convinced that this paper, drafted on the basis on the member states' positions and expectations, will prove to be an important tool to inform our discussions at INC-2. I hope that it will allow us to swiftly identify significant areas of consensus to obtain a mandate for the drafting of a zero-draft agreement for INC-3. Our discussions in Paris will also lead us to the identification of areas where further work is necessary, constituting an important guidance to our efforts in the next intersessional period. Allow me a final reflection. We member states will not be able to rise to the challenge alone. We need the involvement of the different stakeholders of this process, including, amongst others, private sector, innovators, think tanks, universities, and social actors, such as the informal waste pickers. They will feed us with the existing frontier collective intelligence, give us opportunity to connect the dots between already existing brilliant initiatives, but also channel our efforts to conceive an agreement that is just and implementable. The success of the stakeholder submissions and intersessional webinars invite us to continue innovating to better include all of these valuable inputs. As we move forward, the involvement of these stakeholders will also be the cornerstone of our multi-stakeholder action agenda, which experience has shown to be an important pillar in support of this type of agreements. Please count on me as your main ally in this process and do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, colleagues, I'm also happy to welcome you on my behalf for the next steps. I would like to thank Ambassador Gustavo Meza-Quadra for his very substantive opening remarks. I think Ambassador has reminded us why an ambitious treaty is so important. He has also outlined different aspects that we have to address in negotiations, and he has already outlined the way forward to INC-3. As mentioned by the Ambassador, it's very important that we have all the stakeholders on board to create a robust and effective treaty. So I'm very pleased to have such a great panel today here, that representatives from different stakeholder groups will provide their insights, their views on the treaty. I will first give the floor to Jyoti Mathur-Philippe. She is the Executive Secretary of the INC Plastic Pollution Secretariat. Jyoti, very happy to have you here in Geneva. I know you have one meeting after the other, benefiting from the rich network here in Geneva. We're looking forward to hear from you more about the preparations for INC-2.
Thank you so much. And also good afternoon to all of you, Excellencies, colleagues and friends around the table. I think this is my third time in this dialogue, I think second or third, but it is really nice to be in the room with you and not virtually from Nairobi. So very nice to meet all of you personally here, see you all here. Let me give you a small, a short outline of what I'm going to be presenting today. So a little bit about the timeline of the INC process. Both Diana and the ambassador have already talked to us about this, but I'll also just stop on that for a second so that you can hear a little bit more about our sprint to the end. Then I can give you an update on the preparations for INC-2, which includes registrations, logistics, and documentation, a little bit about the thematic side events, the options paper, and the webinars that the chair and the INC Secretariat are going to be undertaking from tomorrow, actually, till the 16th or 18th of May. So a quick overview. We have, as I said, 2.5 years to come to an agreement on this negotiation and a legally binding agreement. We are at INC-2 almost, which starts on 29th of May in Paris. The first one was in Punta del Este in Uruguay. last year. We have the next one is going to be in November in Kenya. So we are actually organizing and planning 5 mini COPs, because that is how much work is going into organizing these. We only seem to have 6 months in between to do the planning and organization, as well as the documents that are needed. But we are having a lot of fun along the way. We have offers from Canada and the Republic of Korea for next year for the meetings, and this should be decided hopefully soon at INC-2, so that everyone can start preparing for the next INCs. So INC registrations close tomorrow. So far, we have actually, I have an updated number on this. We have, I think, 150 member states that have, 153 member states that have registered, which are 511 delegates, 639 stakeholder organizations. These are just organizations. And we have 1,198 delegates. We have 15 UN entities with 54 delegates, 7 IGOs with 17 delegates, and 28 media organizations with 31 delegates. And we still have 1 day to go. So in total, we have 1,811 delegates registered as of an hour ago. So lots of interest in this topic. As I said, INC-2 will take place in Paris next month, and it will take place in UNESCO headquarters, which has a limit, a venue space limit of 1,500 delegates. We have been saying this from the beginning, since the information note was launched, that because of security and fire regulations, only 1,500 delegates are allowed inside the venue. So we will be issuing secondary badges. Your next question to me will be, how many secondary badges will we be issuing per member state and per organization? I will respond that please give me 1 week to come back to you, because I want to make sure that all delegates have been registered. And as registration ends tomorrow, we will have the final counts only tomorrow, and then we will be able to make decisions. We also have and we will also do this in consultation with the chair and the friends of chair, who are the members nominated by their regions to be part of the bureau. We also are providing 2 funded delegates, support to 2 funded delegates from every eligible member state. So far, and maybe these numbers have gone up again, I don't know, but so far we have 234 delegates that have requested for support. We also are providing funding for 20 stakeholders to attend. What is important, and I think the ambassador has already said this, we have to make Paris count. So we need to have vision and leadership in Paris. It is a critical opportunity for members to deliberate and decide between all the possible options. I hope you all have had a chance to look at the options paper, even if only quickly. And I'm very happy to announce that they have gone up in all 6 languages as of yesterday. The discussions in Paris will be based on the options paper. And if you look at the scenario note that was prepared by the chair, all of this has been well written in that paper. He has also together with us, decided that we are going to spend less time on general statements, which will allow us to move swiftly to negotiating substance. So the idea is that we will not have general statements at the opening of the meeting, but when we open agenda item 4, which is the legally binding instrument, the statements can be around the agenda item. And finally, INC-2 also has to determine the mandate for INC-3. So this would include possibly, and of course it's a member state decision, the mandate to the Secretariat and the Chair to develop a zero draft of the first zero draft of the legally binding legal document. I don't know how to express myself on that, so I put in legal many times, and any amount of intercessional work that may be decided. So these are the documentation that was prepared for INC-2. I am pleased to say that all the working documents are uploaded now in all languages except the scenario note. The scenario note is only there in English, but it should be going up in all the languages of the UN shortly next week. We also are preparing not preparing, but we are putting together some information documents so that you don't have to go to many different pages looking for documents. So we have moved the UNEA resolution document under information documents. We have prepared, and I think it should go up today or tomorrow, the note on the conduct of voting, because as you know, some of our procedural issues have not been finalized and there might be a need to vote. So we have developed a paper on the conduct of voting, and this should go up either today, tomorrow, and at the latest on Monday. We will also put up an information document on the dates and venues of subsequent INC sessions. This will be decided under any other business, but we want you to be able to have access to the information on it. And finally, there are, and I will talk about this a little bit later, there was some information that was submitted by member states that we felt would be important to be reflected in an additional information document which supports the options paper. This has not gone up as yet. We are still working on it. We will have 12 thematic side events during INC-2. You can find all of the details of this on our website, which is www.unep.org/INC. We have a very simple URL if you want to go there. We have received 197 requests to join these events, and next week we should be sending out to the organizations that have indicated their interest, information on how to go ahead and prepare these events. And we should be sharing this with our chair shortly so that we can then share it with you. The options paper, as you know, was a mandate that was given to the Secretariat in consultation with the INC chair, and we were asked to prepare a document with potential options for elements towards an international legally binding instrument. It had to be based on a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastics as called for by the UNEA resolution. And it had to include identifying the objective substantive provisions, including core obligations, control measures, voluntary approaches, implementation measures, and means of implementation. As you all know, and I think a lot of you around the table did make submissions on, written submissions, and these can all be found on our website. And the options paper is based on member states' views during INC1 and their written submissions. So there will be a technical briefing on the on the options paper tomorrow. I will not go into detail, more in detail on the options paper now, even if it's in my presentation, so that it allows, so that you so that you all join the webinar tomorrow, and we can, and you can hear from us in more detail how we developed the options paper. We also have 6 webinars in the lead up to INC2. And as I said, tomorrow is the first one. And it is from 3 o'clock, I think around the same time tomorrow. And the last one is on 16th of May. And I think, and again, you can get all the information on our website. And with that, I will say thank you. And we have Bernardo in the picture sitting right opposite me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jyoti, for this very helpful informations. I think it was good also not only provide information about the organization of INC, but also remind us of the demanding task that lays ahead of us. It reminds us that timelines between INCs are short, and that is for sure a challenge for the Secretariat as well as for negotiators. You also have put the nice motto out, make Paris count. And I think that's for sure the call we have heard. It's also a good word to introduce our next speaker. It is Hugo Lequertier. He's the focal point from France for the INC process. And as you know, France is not only welcoming us in Paris for the INC, they're also organizing a high-level segment ahead of the INC, and Hugo will provide further information on their work. Hugo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Felix. So I'm sorry for not being able to be here today in Geneva. So I'm speaking from Paris right now. I would like to thank first the Geneva Environment Network for this opportunity to say a few words about the organization of the second session of the INC to establish a legally binding agreement on plastic pollution, and also maybe to say a few words regarding France's expectations for INC2. So next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Maybe the slide just before. Sorry for that. Yes, thank you. As you know, and as the chair of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, Mr. Ambassador Gustavo Meza-Quadra has reminded us, plastic pollution is a major issue, and it represents a very important problem for the environment and human health. At the current rate, the amount of plastic waste produced in the world will triple by 2060. This is why France welcomes the adoption of UN Environment Assembly Resolutions 5/14 to develop a legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. And we also thank Senegal for hosting the preparatory meeting for the negotiations in May 2022, as well as Uruguay for hosting the first session of the INC in last November. It is an honor for us to continue this momentum and to host the second session in France, and more specifically in Paris. We would like to thank the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee once again for the confidence it placed in us during INC1 by entrusting us with the organization of INC2. We also thank the Secretariat and more specifically its Executive Secretary, Mrs. Jyoti Mathur-Philippe, for their support in organizing this important event. I would like to take this opportunity, firstly, to outline some practical aspects of the organization of the INC2, and secondly, to present the criteria or success of this negotiating session from France's perspective. Next slide, please. Thank you. And next slide again. So as you know, this session of negotiations will take place at UNESCO headquarters in Paris in the 15th arrondissement, which is just a few steps from the Eiffel Tower. The meeting will be held in person only with a video broadcast via YouTube from the plenary rooms. The plenary room that you can see on the right can accommodate over 1,300 people. This meeting will be guaranteed plastic-free. And the UNESCO site is easily accessible by bus or by metro. Next slide, please. Yes, so it's to show you where UNESCO is. In terms of the organization of the week of negotiations, the INC will officially begin on May 29th and end on June the 2nd. And it will be preceded by regional consultations on Sunday, May 28th, sorry. High-level events will also take place on Friday, May 26th, and on Saturday, May 27th. These events are separate from the INC-2, and they are entirely organized and funded by France. Their objective is to maintain a high-level political attention on plastic pollution and to discuss some solutions to address the issue ahead of the opening of INC-2. The purpose of these events is also to enable interactive discussions between high-level state representatives and civil society representatives. Therefore, we have decided to invite only a limited number of ministers of the environment. Invited countries may have received already the letter of invitation or will receive their invitations soon through our embassies. Next slide, please. So regarding registrations, I think that Mrs. Jyoti Mathur-Philippe has already said a lot about the registration process. It is still open until tomorrow. I just wanted to maybe to repeat one thing regarding the limits that we have. So as you know, we have received clear instructions from UNESCO as to the number of people who can be at the conference site simultaneously. So this number is limited to 1,500 delegates, and it is defined for security reasons in order to respect the evacuation rules of the building. So as Mrs. Jyoti Mathur-Philippe said, overflow badges will be distributed and required to enter the building. The number of badges per delegation and per organization will be determined once registration is finalized on April 28th. And this number will be decided by the Secretariat. Next slide, please. Regarding the visa, delegates must submit their visa applications as soon as possible, but no later than 4 weeks before the opening of INC-2, which is actually tomorrow. Visas must be obtained in advance and cannot be issued upon arrival in France. So delegates should visit the official France Visa website to verify whether or not they need a visa to enter France. Visa will be made available at the consulates or consular sections of our embassies. If we do not have an embassy in your country of origin, then it is possible that the visa is issued by the embassy or consulate of another member country of the Schengen area. I invite you to consult the information note distributed by the Secretariat, which details the different steps to follow in order to apply. This procedure is also detailed on the France Visa website. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide again, please. So if I can say a few words on France expectations. So from France perspectives and as a host country, we have high expectations for this session. We hope that it will lead to substantial progress in the negotiations. Indeed, INC-1 devoted a significant amount of time to procedural issues. Some issues remained unsolved. including the question of the adoption of the rules of procedures and the election of the Bureau, as well as the decision on the date and place of the next negotiating sessions. So we hope that these issues will be resolved in the early hours of INC-2. We understand that in the event of persistent blockages, a vote could be held on maybe on the first day, on Monday, including the election of the Bureau. As the host country, we are vigilant that this option is logistically guaranteed. We hope that substantive discussions can then begin quickly and can continue, ideally, in contact groups. Of course, all this will depend on the decision of the chair of the committee. On the substance, in light of the written contributions submitted by countries and stakeholders, and of the options paper published by the INC Secretariat, we hope that initial lines of convergence will be emerging during INC-2. We are confident that significant progress can be made in Paris on the objective of the future treaty, on its scope, as well as on a first idea of the binding measures and obligations and the means of implementation that it will contain. Together with the European Union and its member states, France has strong ambitions for this treaty. We advocate for a coherent set of measures covering the entire life cycle of plastics and including targets for reducing the overall supply of plastics, but also bans on problematic and unnecessary polymers, chemicals, and plastic products, eco-design criteria and standards for producers, global targets on reuse, incorporation of recycled material, collection and recycling, the promotion or even the obligation to set up extended producer responsibility channels, transparency, and consumer information obligations. As the host country, we hope that this meeting will allow the adoption of a decision that will mandate the chairman of the committee to draft a first version of the text of the agreement by INC-3. Indeed, as you know, our timetable is ambitious. The UNEA resolution specifies that an agreement on the treaty must be reached by the end of 2024. It is therefore important that we move quickly into the substantive negotiations and begin to move towards consensus. We count on the commitment of all countries in these negotiations, and we thank the President of the Bureau, Ambassador Gustavo Meza-Quadra, and the Executive Secretary of the INC Secretariat, Mrs. Jyoti Mathur-Philippe, and their teams for their commitment to the success of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo, for this presentation. And not outlining only the logistics of Paris. You can imagine myself, like many other delegates, were quite excited to be in Paris end of May, but also outlining the ambitions that you have and also making clear, we already heard from Jyoti before, that procedural aspects are important also at the beginning of this meeting. We have heard the Secretary is preparing a note on the voting. You have confirmed that the logistics are there, that we're able to vote. So these are very helpful, concrete examples that will help us to make a successful INC-2, establish the Bureau, and then also address, have a good grounds to address the substantive questions. We have seen in the chat there's a question about plastic-free. We will address those questions at the end when we have heard all the different speakers. We'll select the questions, but who, if you want to respond directly in the chat, that's also possible. Someone was asking the question, what does a plastic-free meeting mean? The person was also making reference to the textile sector and was wondering if we are wearing clothes there, as many of our clothes are containing plastics. We are turning to the next agenda item, stakeholder perspective, and I'm happy to provide the floor to Ambassador Claro Delgado. Ambassador, you are from Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde is a member of the High Ambition Alliance, Ambition Coalition, and is also a SITS, one of the member states, a group of member states very active in these questions. We're very much forward looking to hear from your side. What do you expect from the INC-2? What your ambition, your perspective is? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you, Geneva Environmental Dialogue, for extending an invitation to Cabo Verde. Today, I will almost talk about my country and why we embrace this discussion, why we are part of HAC. Thank you for extending an invitation to Cabo Verde to participate in this webinar on the second session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. It is an honor for us to be invited and to speak on such an important matter that affects our nations, and in particular Cabo Verde as a small island development state. As you may know, Cabo Verde is a small island state nation located off the coast of West Africa, and like many others island nations, it is highly vulnerable to the impacts of the plastic pollution, especially in the marine environment. Therefore, the development of an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, is likely to have significant implications for my country, Cabo Verde. In my statement made on the 2nd November last year, when I announced the decision of Cabo Verde to join the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution, I emphasized that we face the same challenges than many other countries which coastal areas faces. The impact of plastic pollution and toxic chemical and additive in plastic on health, our livelihoods and our economies is detrimental. In our shores, there is so much trash that we can now find birds breeding nets wall made by plastic debris, mostly fishing nets. And it is not just birds that are in trouble. Baby sea turtle, after hatching, can get tangled up in fishing nets washing ashore. Fish in Cabo Verde's waters are full of microplastics. In Cabo Verde, the trend of embracing single-use plastic en masse is relatively recent. So we approved a law recently that we are going to use only use a plastic one time only. Plastic bottles, for example, from a country so far like Bangladesh and other countries, our neighbor countries that I will not mention the name, discard or lost nylon fishing nets from fishermen across the globe regularly wash up on our islands, despite their location hundreds of miles from the nearest landmass. The litter is ferried there by the powerful Canary Ocean current. We have already opened our first recycling center in the island of San Vicente. Before that, there was no way to recycle, and to this day, recycling remains in the hands of just a few non-profit organizations. The work is essential to be done, that we can reach consensus, or we can discuss in Paris in May, next May. Cabo Verde is doing or is trying to do a good job. Sure, these beaches that are frequently by tourists, and we are trying to clean our beaches because, as you know, our tourism represents 25% of our GDP, and with the tourism we have 10% of formal employment. So, as you also be aware, any domestic action or regional initiative to clean our beaches and to fight plastic pollution has demonstrated to be insufficient. So we need to think about it and to discuss that issue, how we can tackle the problem of plastic pollution. So I think that saying that to global problems, we need global responses. So I can notice that a small island development state, Cabo Verde, have been tremendously impacted by plastic pollution, as I mentioned before. An ambitious and effective treaty will ultimate depend on our participation in the negotiation and how we harness action and expertise from other processes and fora across region through collective action across the United Nations and with organizations such as WTO, that the discussion is going on, the UNCTAD. So we think that we need an ambitious treaty. To finalize, I would like to say that by participating in the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee, Cabo Verde will have the opportunity to contribute to the development of this global treaty and advocate for measures to reduce plastic pollution not only in our waters, but in the other waters of the countries that belongs to high ambition coalition. Additionally, the outcome of this negotiation could help strengthening Cabo Verde's domestic policies and regulation related to plastic pollution and marine litter. Overall, this invitation represents an opportunity for Cabo Verde to engage in the global effort to address plastic pollution and protect its marine environment. I wish you all a good discussion today. And I think that we will have more discussion in Paris. Cabo Verde will be there with 2 delegations. So let's hope to meet in Paris and to continue our discussion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this impressive statement. I think you have reminded us, shown us very clear pictures how Cabo Verde is affected by the plastic pollution, not only the wildlife, but also socioeconomically. You have also showed the relation that we need global rules, we need domestic action, but to enable domestic action, we need those global rules. And also once more, this global dimension that many of the plastic waste you're concerned about is not from your own sources, but coming from abroad. I'm happy to turn over to Jodie Russell. She is presenting the private sector perspective. Jodie is the lead for global power, public affairs, packaging and sustainability at Nestlé. She's also a driving force behind the Business Coalition for a Global Plastic Treaty, this coalition that has been an important voice also to remind us that we need global rules to achieve a substantive treaty. And very forward-looking, Jodie, to hear from you.
Thank you, Felix. And thank you very much to the Geneva Environment Network for offering us this opportunity to share the Business Coalition's views. So a little bit about the coalition. We are a group today of over 100 organizations who've joined together from consumer brands and retailers, financial institutions, converters of packaging, as well as producers of packaging, waste management companies, as well as partners in the NGO, Business Association, and other supporting industries. Our vision is that a circular economy will be built in which plastic never becomes a waste material or pollution, and that the value of products and materials will always be retained in the economy. And we're looking at the treaty as an opportunity to bring harmonized legislation forward. This ideally would take place in 3 areas: in reduction of plastic production, virgin plastic production, and an approach that will integrate a circular economy in the future, circulation of all plastic items that cannot be eliminated, and prevention and remediation of remaining and hard to abate plastics, both microplastics and macroplastics, to prevent their leakage into the environment. Now, we've been busy in the intersessional period working on not only on our pre-INC-2 position paper, which is available as a submission on the website of UNEP, but additionally a new paper that will respond to the priority policy areas that we hope will be addressed in the upcoming negotiations. With substantive topics, there are 11 of them that we share here on reduction, elimination criteria, reuse options and new delivery models, product design and recycling systems, extended producer responsibility, EPR, which is a hotly debated topic, recycled plastics, the role of the informal sector, waste management, microplastics, and lastly, some cross-cutting issues, which include economic and financial mechanisms, as well as monitoring and reporting based on existing experience from the business sector. Some high-level observations about the options paper. Firstly, it's a tremendous piece of work, and we recognize it's a good intermediate step that will support facilitating discussions amongst the negotiators. We think it's particularly encouraging that potential core options and control measures are outlined, and many of them are in alignment with the coalition's vision statement. Particularly important are some elements that could be strengthened or deepened or refined in subsequent iterations, and I'll cover those in my next slide. But in general, we see the option paper not yet recognizing the need to tailor control measures to specifics of different business sectors as well as product applications. We hope that this will happen through the development of technical annexes. We recognize that the applications of plastic are numerous and it's not possible to address everything at once, but there are some high priority sectors that could be addressed in the initial treaty negotiation before we hope the process will result in a series of COPs allowing us to build and strengthen on measures in the future. In terms of elements or options that we hope will be strengthened, I'll cover three: reuse and refill, recyclability, and extended producer responsibility. So in terms of reuse and refill or alternative delivery systems, it's particularly relevant to the world of consumer packaging, packaging representing about 40% of plastic application today. We're looking particularly at an expansion of reuse and how it would be addressed in the treaty, particularly with options around reuse infrastructure going beyond the design measures that should be considered, as it will require systemic intervention in order to scale reuse and refill systems. Whether this is about national and international regulation, a category by category approach to reuse for different types of products, or looking at specific phase-in timelines and standards that would need to be applied to facilitate shared packaging infrastructure. There's a lot to discuss here. Recyclability. We're happy that there has been a discussion around technical recyclability, but we think the movement needs to be toward recyclability in practice and at scale. Designing products for recycling, similar to the work that is promoted today by the Consumer Goods Forum, for example, with their golden design rules. This is work that approximately 100 companies are voluntarily participating in. This needs to scale up to millions of companies, not hundreds. And so we need to look at how recyclability can be mandated by design, and then moving beyond that, how do we recycle in practice and at scale? And thirdly, on extended producer responsibility. The language around extended producer responsibility is not as ambitious as we would hope for today. Action programs or a set of guidelines aren't specific enough. We hope that this will become a fully fledged annex in the future. Today, if we look at the scale of the challenge in compliance, I'll give you just a couple numbers that our legal colleagues at Nestlé support us in assembling and monitoring. Up from January this year, where there were 58 extended producer responsibility laws at the national level, today in April there are 65. In terms of draft laws, 41 additional countries have draft laws, up from 36 in January. So my question to you as a representative of the business sector is, if you're representing a medium-sized exporter in your country, how do you comply with that many different regulations at the same time? If you have to suddenly assess 65 plus another 41 extended producer responsibility regulations and comply with them all. It's a formidable challenge. And this treaty offers us the opportunity, ultimately, to put in place harmonized legislation that will do the right thing for the environment and enable business to comply and to be a partner in solutions. And that's what extended producer responsibility systems, when well designed and implemented, can do. So our expectations toward INC-2, our policy recommendations are showing that leading businesses in the space want a treaty with legally binding global rules and measures that are going to drive change on a global scale. This will come through harmonized regulation addressing reduction, circulation, and prevention, along with remediation. And on the basis of that option paper, we hope in INC-2 to see the request that will move to a zero draft legal text before the INC-3, building on the options paper and enhancing the understanding of elements in the options paper that need to be strengthened, in particular, reuse, extended producer responsibility, moving from design for recycling to actual recyclability, and the need to differentiate by plastic application. So I'll pause my comments there and happy to take any questions later. Thank you again for the opportunity to represent the Business Coalition.
Thank you very much, Jody, for this interesting perspective. I'm always amazed by this very clear vision, that plastic never becomes waste or pollution. And it's very empowering to hear that from the private sector, also knowing that it is possible, that you have tools and we have to find ways how to apply them on a broader scale to achieve this vision. I'm turning to Suhair Ahmed Koshik. He represents the youth perspective. We know young people don't only represent the future, but also often are the bearers of innovative and new ideas. So Suhair, we are looking forward to hear from you, your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Felix. Excellencies, distinguished speakers and participants, it's an honor for me to be here with such high-level speakers and with other stakeholders and share the youth perspective. I would start with a small story. I was actually going through a news article a couple of days ago of a renowned daily newspaper, where it is mentioned, in the post-COVID situation in many countries, especially countries like Bangladesh and other LDCs and low middle-income countries, a big portion of the population are pushed into poverty. And for these, a lot of children and youth, they are getting out of the educational institutions and schools. And a big portion of these youth and children, they are getting into waste picking because they need to earn money to sustain. And in Bangladesh, we have seen 32% of them have engaged in waste picking and getting them exposed to, the plastic pollution. So it's a violation of human rights, of their basic rights, that they deserve to have education, and also they deserve to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And plastic is posing threat to that because they are, working in the waste picking sector, waste management sector as informal workers. That reminds us that the human rights should be the core of the this plastic treaty negotiation. And for these, we demand that human rights should be addressed, environmental human rights should be addressed in the objectives of the international legally binding instruments. We have already seen the option paper, the human health, protection of human health, environment is mentioned. And I on behalf of the youth group, I demand that member state that mention human rights in the objectives, because in the past we have seen these member states and the delegates, they're referring to human rights while delivering interventions in high-level meetings. And we are all informed about the things that human rights, plastic pollution is a big threat to our environmental human rights. We, as youth constituencies, we are still critically reviewing the options paper and other documents, and we are gradually preparing our policy position for the second round of negotiations. But yeah, we can obviously share some of the perspectives what we have already taken note of. First, we believe that this future instrument must build on global targets, because in other MES we have seen the national determined, in case of the national determined contributions, those are not legally, there's no legal obligations, and there are a lot of COPs happen just to settle the things, and there is no obligation for countries to implement what they have nationally decided to contribute. So this treaty must build on a set of global targets. We also take note that this options paper focus on strengthening waste management and improving the waste management infrastructure. And for this, we demand dedicated grant-based funds for the developing countries and the LDCs who would be benefited from these. We also take note that a key aspect involved in the full life cycle of plastic is that big polluters access to the financing. And we would demand, we ask that more attention to be placed on reducing and removing fossil fuel and petrochemical subsidies. We have already heard about extended producer responsibilities. We have taken note that some of the member states, they mentioned that not just producer, also the importers have responsibilities. So we request member states to take a note of that, that producers, both producers and the importers, they have the responsibility for addressing plastic pollution. There's one big challenge with the legacy plastic, and there's one we believe that one of the core obligations should be to address legacy plastic issues, especially which has been already dumped in our ocean. We should invest in inventing new technologies so that we can remove all those plastics from the ocean and protect our marine biodiversity from the harmful consequences of plastic pollution. In the options paper, in the seventh possible core obligation, we have seen there's a note which mentions as an estimation of the new reuse schemes and delivery models could create 1.4 million jobs globally, which reminds that this plastics treaty in future has a lot of potential to create a lot of green jobs. And when the green jobs are created and entrepreneurship are facilitated, young people will have a big portion of the benefit. They'll have decent jobs. And for this, we demand that treaty must facilitate and focus on the just transition and circular economic approaches, so that, and also subsidizing youth entrepreneurs, bringing new innovative ideas and putting those into action for replacing, problematic plastics and other plastic products. Uh, 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 and that's why we demand that there should be an provision to provide economic benefits to environment-friendly alternatives to plastics. And we believe that through these, young people will be benefited through green jobs and entrepreneurship. As a implementation measure, national action plan is obviously an important section, and there we demand that there should be a minimum standard and set of instructions for making action plans ambitious and effective. And while reporting back on the implementation of the national action plans, there should be a the member says they should decide on having strong punitive measures if they fail to, reach the targets that they have mentioned in the national action plans. And lastly, it's also very important, to raise the awareness among the people, because a large portion of our population still believe that the single-use plastic is helpful for keeping the standard of our lifestyle. So that reminds us that we really need to raise massive awareness among our population, among our people, and education on these, especially on waste management and other relevant things we need to promote, especially to prepare young people and the future generations to implement the goals and targets of this future instrument. We need to upskill them, we need to educate them. And obviously young people, though policymaker will negotiate this instrument, but young people, they are on ground and they'll be implementing this instrument. So there we need to invest in educating our young people and the future generation. For making sure that we are having an effective and broader youth participation in INC-2, we have already created a coalition, namely Global Youth Coalition on Plastic Pollution, GYCPP, where we have brought together 6 different youth constituencies from different categories of stakeholder participation of INC-2. This youth constituency represents the voice of global youths working on different aspects or affected by the different aspects of plastic pollution. This global youth coalition is currently preparing its policy position for INC-2, and during the negotiation, we will inform member states and other stakeholders about our position and about our expectations and demands for from the negotiation. And lastly, it's important You know, young people, they consist of around like 30 or 35% of the global population. So we need to make sure that young people's voices are heard in these kind of important and vital discourses. And that's why we demand that we expect and we request the host country and the or organizations or other parties or other stakeholders who are in position to support young people. We have already accredited more than 40 youth, but there is obviously a huge crisis because young people, they don't have access to funding, and sometimes it's very difficult to get a visa. So we request the host country to take a look on that, and also the other stakeholders who are in position to help and support this youth coalition. Thank you.
Thank you much, Suhair, for those points, also bringing the human rights perspective and addressing different elements that should be part of the treaty. I'm turning to Bethany Carney-Almroth. She's a professor at the Gothenburg University and member of the Scientist Coalition for an Effective Plastic Treaty. As we know, scientists have played a key role in alerting the larger public about the dimension of and impacts of plastic pollution, as often takes a bit of time till policymakers hear the scientists. And I think we have to continue listening to the scientists also to design an effective treaty that addresses the most important problems. Bethany, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm calling in from Sweden, and I'm at home, and I just heard my dogs knocking on the door, so I apologize if we're interrupted. My name is Bethany. I'm representing the Scientist Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty, and as you heard, I'm a professor of ecotoxicology at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And there we go. Our goal is to achieve an effective global plastics treaty centered on and around evidence-based decision-making, building on the INEA resolution that was taken last year. And then we've heard a number of the previous speakers mention the right to a clean environment as a human right. I would also like to point out that the right to access to knowledge and science is another human right that we're very keen on supporting. We have two sub-goals. One is to mobilize a diverse and international multidisciplinary network of scientists to engage with and provide evidence to government delegations throughout the treaty negotiations. And the second is to identify, analyze, and address biases, misunderstandings, or misrepresentations that may be promoted in attempts to weaken the global framework. I'm going to come back to that idea a little bit towards the end of my few minutes here. So we've been working hard on gathering scientists. There are right now about 200 members in our group from 45 different countries. We're very keen on having global representation and subject matter representation. So we have broad expertise across natural and social sciences, and we have people representing different regions of the world where different problems might be evident. And this group formed in a very grassroots manner from the scientist declaration, which was supporting the treaty that, or the resolution that was adopted in INEA 5.2. So it began very organically, and now we've been organizing ourselves and exist solely for the purpose of supporting this treaty negotiation. A number of our scientists, and this is a non-exhaustive list of examples, have been publishing ideas about where the science informs us on what we need to see in this treaty. So one, for example, would be on framing plastics pollution from a systemic perspective, including not only marine science, as was the tradition in the field for many years, but also plastics through their life cycle from social, ecological, and policy perspectives. We also see the need for upstream measures like a cap on production and the need to address problematic chemicals and polymers on the market. We need to see a simplification of what that market looks like. And we also need to see that we're designing so that we can sustainably use plastics. So recycling as it stands right now is not sustainable and not functioning, and it cannot be done safely and efficiently. But if we can change the way that we're making and using these materials, we might be able to reach that at some point in the future. We did get ourselves to Uruguay. As I said, we're a new group, we're organizing. We teamed up with some other scientist groups, so we're not the only ones, like the International Science Council was also on the ground there. And when we were in Uruguay, a number of our scientists helped to moderate the multi-stakeholder dialogues, and we were able to give feedback during the plenary, which we were thankful for that opportunity. And we also started what we really initially set out to do, by creating a side event that we called Ask a Scientist, and created an arena for delegates that need to come in contact with scientists to start asking their questions. And we're noticing that while some delegations are quite strong and have large members and very close contact to scientists and experts, there are others that do not have that contact. So we're very happy to have this opportunity and start fielding questions. We answered those that we had the expertise and the language skills to answer on the spot there, and the rest of the questions we brought with us back to try to connect people with the right people to answer their questions. What we've been doing in the interim is working on a few different fronts. For example, reviewing the Compass report. There were about 30 of our scientists that committed to that work. We've turned in about 300 specific comments. We also raised issues with scoping of the documents, which were not as broad as we'd have liked to see, and we didn't see as much emphasis on systems perspective as we would like to see. We've also been participating in webinars like this one, and a lot of our scientists have been working with the HAC, the HAC, and their webinar series. We've been engaging with government delegations on specific questions when we've been asked, and we've also been mobilizing to try to get our scientists to INC-2 to help support the delegates there on the ground. And this has been a little bit of a challenge. We find that a lot of our scientists are struggling to get there because academic institutions cannot be accredited to UNEP as they do not fulfill both nonprofit and non-governmental requirements. I know that the UN and UNEP have opened up for accreditation through, for example, BRS, but a lot of our scientists are going with, for example, civil society groups, and this does raise questions around transparency, which we're concerned about, and potentially even credibility, because we're not displaying our places of employment and where we're working as clearly as we would like to. So I just wanted to raise that issue. Some of us are getting there. And now in the interim, and what we plan to do moving forward is to work in our working groups where we're bringing together experts to address specific questions that the delegates have been raising and that have come up in conversation and in the elements reports and so on. And this includes things like addressing chemicals and polymers, bioplastics and biodegradable plastics, the circular economy, chemical recycling, and what we can do to work for national and global indicators from monitoring and reporting. We're also engaging in discussions around what a scientific advisory board could look like for this process and going forward in the future. And we're addressing issues of conflict of interest, which can potentially raise false solutions or lead us to regrettable substitution or potentially greenwashing that can lull us into a business as usual approach. And if I touch very briefly on the Scientific Advisory Board, so 42% of the national submissions to the INC called for establishing a science body, and there is no official science body right now, but we see the need for an interim science advisory mechanism, and we've been filling that void a little bit in an informal way. But this group would need to respond to information requests from the parties, provide peer reviews and feedback of relevant documentation and evidence-based decision-making, contribute to scientific documents to the parties or the Secretariat at their request, and potentially suggest experts that could work in larger groups during the INC process. That group of experts would have to be broad, cover the different aspects of the plastics problem from both natural science, social sciences, and indigenous scientists as mandated by the resolution. These are all yet to be determined, so the mandate of such a group, who the participants would be, who would be recommending them, if there would be some sort of funding model for this, and so on and so forth, is yet to be determined. So hopefully that can be discussed during INC-2. And going forward, there needs to be a discussion about what science advisory mechanisms would look like in the treaty itself beyond this negotiating process, and whether that would be embedded into the treaty and there would be a specific group dedicated specifically to the plastics treaty, or if it might be included under another group, for example, the SPP. So again, yet to be determined. On a final note, I just want to bring up the question of conflicts of interest. This is something that we're addressing in our own group through disclosure statements to make sure that we're not introducing biases, because this is a problem that it has been documented for decades in these sorts of questions around chemicals and regulations. And conflicts of interest have the potential to impair objectivity and create unfair advantages in dialogues and discussions. And there are a lot of techniques that have been used to muddy waters, create doubt, and delay action. And this includes challenging the problem, whether or not it exists. I think we can all agree that the problem does exist. Challenging causation, so the causality between the problem and the effects that we're seeing. Challenging the messenger, the scientists in this case, and challenging potential solutions. And they can be called unduly burdensome to governments, to taxpayers, to businesses, and so on, or they might be unfair or pointed out or claimed to be so. And there are a lot of techniques that are used. This is also well documented. There's a body of literature on this, but this includes misrepresenting information, criticizing scientific studies, discrediting authors of the studies. And we're starting to see these sort of things happen now around some of our scientists. So these are mechanisms that are good for, I think, the treaty negotiators to be aware of when they are looking at proposed solutions and science, and like check out who the messenger is, right? And there's also a potential for exaggerated or misrepresented language and so on. So with that, I'll end. Those are my thoughts on what science can contribute here. Our goal, as I said, is to support the treaty negotiators with the best available science, this best evidence for decision-making in this process. There will be a number of us at the meeting in Paris, and you can find us by scanning this QR code. And if there are any listeners on the call now that are interested in joining the group, please also scan this and find us. And you can send in your documentation and join us. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you very much, Bethany, for this presentation. Very interesting. I think you have reminded us that we have really to look at the whole life cycle approach, address also upstream and midstream. I think the emphasis there that was quite clear. Also raising the issue of conflict of interest. I think that's a very important topic, and I think we can also benefit from many other international organizations based in Geneva, for example, who have worked on those issues and get inspired by their examples and check them how they're also working for a plastic treaty. I also like very much the tool you have presented, Ask a Scientist. I think that is really something that we need. And I hope that this will not only a webinar or a side event at INC, but it will create a function to have during the negotiation, the intersessional process, that we have kind of a compendium of scientists where we can knock at their doors to get answers to questions when we are not sure about something.
Absolutely. It's a service we're here to provide.
I'm turning to our last speaker on the panel. That's David Azoulay. He's director of the Geneva office of the Environmental Health Program of CIEL, the Center for International Environmental Law. David will provide a perspective from the civil society, and he will particularly talk about what he expects as outcome of INC-2 and some thoughts on the options paper.
Thank you very much, Felix, and thank you very much to the Geneva Environment Network for organizing such an event and for inviting us. And thank you very much for all of the speakers that spoke before me, and that some of them are going to make my life much simpler because they highlighted already a number of things that I wanted to say. As was mentioned by a number of speakers, we have a very ambitious timeline and objective for this treaty, and this is why I wanted to focus my comments and my reflections here specifically on the upcoming meeting of the INC-2 in Paris and identify what is it that we want to absolutely see coming out of it, that we need to see coming out of it in order to give us a chance to succeed in our endeavor to end plastic pollution as we were mandated to do by the UNEA resolution and mandate. A number of the things that we had identified as critical to see coming out of the INC were already mentioned by the chair and by a number of countries before us. We need to have, I think, first of all, a working agreement on what is exactly the objective of the treaty. In that respect, the options paper presents us with a number of objectives, 3 options for the objective. Civil society very strongly favors objective A and B that take into consideration, that put at the center of the objective of the treaty, the consideration about health and environmental impact throughout the life cycle of the plastic. In that respect, I want to make a little note to mention that there are a lot of talks about circularity and ensuring that materials stay in the circular economy, etc. In that sense, I think it is extremely important to remember that plastic pollution is not just what the eye can see, but a lot of the plastic pollution is actually invisible and cannot be seen. And in that respect, it is very useful to go back to existing definition of what plastic pollution is. Let's remember that our objective is to end plastic pollution. And there are different ways to define plastic pollution. Some of the definitions that have been put forward that seem to us most relevant and that have been used in the past by existing international organizations and report writers define plastic pollution as broadly all emissions and risks arising from the production, use, and disposal of plastics. And that allows us to address including the toxicity aspect, not just of the plastic products or not just once products are left in the environment, but also the impacts on workers who produce plastic, on fence line communities who are exposed to a lot of impacts. And this is, we believe, a very key element. So getting a working agreement on the objective for the treaty will be very important to allow us to move forward. As was mentioned by others, we will need to have fully operational rules of procedure, or at the very least, and get an agreement on functional provisional rules of procedure. We're going to need to have a functional bureau coming out of INC-2, an agreement on dates and place for the next INC. I'm glad to see that this is something that is already being almost finalized, even though I'm sure that will require a few more conversations. As was also mentioned by others, I think it will be extremely important to have a clear mandate to prepare a zero draft for discussion at INC-3, I'm sorry. We believe that that mandate should be given to the chair of the process with support from the Secretariat, and we very much hope to see that clear decision mandate come out of the discussion in Paris. Further up, to facilitate the preparation of this zero draft, we believe that it will be quite useful to start ruling out potential options. And this is where I want to make a few comments and reflection on the options paper that has been prepared by the Secretariat. That options paper constitutes a very good basis for the discussions to be happening in Paris. Again, there are very strong elements in this paper. There are a few things that are possibly unfortunate. We've identified that some of the language used in the options paper does not accurately reflect the language that was used in some of the country submissions. We've seen, for example, that a lot of the control measures were conflated with voluntary measures in the options paper, and that seems to us relatively unfortunate, as we believe that the main focus should be on legally binding measures, as was articulated by the majority of the country submissions. And this is what the zero draft should be focusing on. And of course, we're going to have to discuss voluntary measures as well, but it will be useful to leave those for later stages in the process and not divert attention for what is absolutely needed. We also believe that one way to strengthen the options that are currently in the paper is to very strongly insist on the upstream part of the treaty. As was identified, upstream part of control measures has been identified by all the modeling that has been done until now. Unless we cap and reduce the production of virgin plastic, we will fail at ending plastic pollution and even at reducing plastic pollution. And we might very well find ourselves in the 20 or 30 years and seeing that plastic pollution has actually increased. And so in that respect, there were a number of elements in the country submissions that were maybe not sufficiently reflected in the options paper, including the references to limiting and ending fossil fuels and petrochemical subsidies that play a major role in the petrochemical build-out, and that we will absolutely need to tackle if we want to have a chance to do this. And also, as I mentioned before, I'm sorry, focusing on health to define circularity and to frame all the options and all the provisions that we'll be including in the future treaty that will avoid using full solution, or as is often referred to in the chemical spaces, jumping from the pan to the fire in devising what we think to be solutions. So again, coming to the end, I think very importantly, coming out of INC-2, we will need a clear mandate for the development of the zero draft. We'll need to start ruling out options, focusing on mandatory and legally binding control measures, and also identify other intersessional work. We cannot just wait for the chair, with the help of the secretariat, to develop a zero draft between INC-2 and INC-3. Everybody will have to do a lot of work in some aspects that could be worked on in parallel. Could be, for example, the development of criteria to identify the most problematic polymers, monomers, chemicals, and or products that would be subject to control measures, as well as starting collecting ideas for innovative financing mechanism. We know that implementing this treaty will require very large amounts of new financing, and we cannot rely on business as usual and just ask donor country to provide financing to implement this. We are going to need to develop innovative funding strategies for that, and we cannot wait until the last INCs to develop this. Otherwise, we risk failing our objectives and failing future generations. Thank you very much, and we very much look forward to be on the ground in Paris and to engage with all the participants, hoping that we will be able to get into the building, because I understand that there's still some limitations that will happen around there. Thank you.
Thank you much, David, for this very comprehensive overview. When I was listening to all the speakers, I really can say we have some good news. The logistics are ready. We are ready to be welcomed in Paris, I think. We have seen some pictures of the Eiffel Tower on some of the slides. Giotto whispered in my ear that it is clear no one, also delegate, will have time to go to Eiffel Tower, but hopefully we'll see it at least from far. I think we also have heard the importance of the procedural aspects, know that we need a bureau, we need to decide on the locations and date for the next INCs. If necessary, both of the items we will have to vote. Hopefully we can avoid this. There's also the need for sure that we work further to get these global rules, these control measures. We have heard this vision, plastic should never become waste or pollution, and we need a treaty that really allows us to achieve this vision. So that really means that we have these global rules in place, that we have the measures in place that allows us to make this substantive progress in reasonably short time to act on plastic pollution. We also need the substantive progress in the negotiation space. We have heard a lot that we need for INC-3 a mandate for the chair to write the zero draft. And I think that will be a big step from an options paper to a zero draft. So it's very important that we have time for substantive work, substantive discussions at the INC-2, and then also intersessionally to further progress on the discussions. I have seen that most of the questions in the chat have been responded, so I would like to turn to all the panelists with one last question from my side. And please, I would just want to hear one sentence from everybody, and the question is very simple. What is the most important outcome you expect from INC-2? And let's take the reverse order, so we would start with David about that. What is the outcome you hope most for from INC-2?
If I had to just use one sentence, I would say everything that I've mentioned in my interventions. But if I have to go shorter than this, I think is a clear mandate coming out of INC-2 for the development of a zero draft and for intersessional work to be carried out forward, and also providing a clear logical structure for negotiators to engage specifically on the substance and on how to move forward for the next 18 months.
Thank you. Jody?
Risking repeating David's point with other words, I had noted a mandate for the zero draft, including specification of some of the core objectives and annexes to be negotiated in the fall.
Thank you. I realized I jumped a bit. We go back to Bethany.
Yeah, I'm going to have to repeat what some of the previous speakers have said and ask for a zero draft that does have clear mandates on obligations, preferably to be binding obligations, focusing a lot on upstream measures. And I would also like to see text on the science advisory mechanism, what that's going to look like to ensure that we're basing our decisions on the best available science.
Thank you. Suhair from the youth.
Okay. I'm not going to repeat that my previous speakers have already mentioned because it's yeah, we get less opportunity to speak, and that's why we want to make the best opportunity, best use of it. Yeah, as I said in my intervention, that we have a very broad objective negotiated at INC-2 of the future treaty, and human rights is mentioned there. And also this global youth coalition is taken into consideration for further support and appreciation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. And don't be afraid to repeat what others have said. I think for negotiation, always good to hear when you have convergence. That's always a good sign. So we are not afraid of that. Ambassador, what is your biggest expectation? What is the main outcome we should achieve at INC-2?
Thank you. I think also that we need a clear mandate. We need to have a draft that we can share with our delegation that will be in Paris, that they can be more prepared to engage in the discussion in Paris. Thank you.
Thank you. Hugo, what is the one thing you expect as an outcome from the INC-2?
Thank you, Felix. Yes, of course, I think the zero draft is one of the best one of the outcomes that we would like to have at INC-2, and if we can see some convergence on some elements of the options paper, it would be good also.
Thank you for that. And last but not least, Jyoti, your expectation.
So it's very heartening that everyone is converging on the need for a zero draft. And so that is very important for us if we want to reach the end of next year with an agreement. So I'm happy that everyone is talking about that. For me, if I'm a little bit more greedy, I would say that intersessional work agreed not only up to INC-3, but also some of the intersessional work that we might need till INC-5, for example, a legal group or an expert group or something like that. And of course, the dates and venues, because it is my job to plan these dates and venues of all 3 future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I take on board that really this zero draft is the core, but not just any zero draft, but one that contains those legally binding rules, those elements that will allow us to really achieve the objective to end plastic pollution. Yes, so we are coming to the end of our panel. I would like to thank all the panelists for their contributions. All those colleagues have sent in questions. And also special thank to Jen, the Jen team, for organizing at this webinar. Once more, a very successful, informative one. And I'm looking forward to see many of you in Paris for the INC-2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the attendees in the room online. For those who are still with us, although we went over time, just bringing to your attention some of the upcoming events. We have the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions Conference of the Parties starting next week. And we are organizing their various side events and supporting other stakeholders' side events also. So join us online if you're not registered to attend the COPs, and you will be able to follow some of the events linking to human rights and other topics that have been mentioned here today. And for those interested in other topics, there are a few more events coming up. You have them on the screen. Visit our website for more information, and we look all forward to have you at our upcoming events. Thank you.